The stagecoach rolled to a halt in Cherry Creek, Colorado territory, and Helena Daniels stepped down onto ground that felt as foreign as the surface of the moon, her hands trembling as she clutched her carpetbag containing everything she owned in this world. It was March of 1877, and the mountain air cut through her traveling cloak like knives of ice. She had traveled from Philadelphia after answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride, desperate to escape the suffocating life of servitude in her aunt's house after her parents had died of fever. The man who had written her such promising letters, a merchant named Gerald Thompson, was supposed to meet her here. She scanned the dusty street, searching for his face among the rough-looking men who watched the stagecoach with curious eyes. An hour passed. Then two. The stage driver had already departed, and Helena stood on the wooden walkway outside the general store, her heart sinking with each passing minute. The proprietor, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, finally invited her inside where a pot-bellied stove provided warmth against the bitter cold. "You are waiting for someone?" Mrs. Chen asked, her accent revealing her origins from far across the Pacific. "A man named Gerald Thompson. He was supposed to marry me. We have been corresponding for 3 months." Helena's voice cracked with the reality settling over her. She had spent every penny she had on the journey west. There was nothing left for a return ticket, even if she had somewhere to return to. Mrs. Chen's expression grew troubled. "Thompson left town 2 weeks ago. Owed money all over. The sheriff ran him out." The words hit Helena like a physical blow. She sank onto a wooden crate, her vision swimming. But his letters. He said he owned a mercantile, he said. He owned nothing but debts and lies, child. Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder. "You are not the first girl he deceived." There was another last year who came from St. Louis. Helena pressed her hands to her face, fighting the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She was alone, penniless in a harsh mountain town with winter still gripping the land in its frozen fist. The door burst open, bringing with it a gust of frigid wind, and a tall figure dusted with snow. The man who entered was lean and weathered, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a heavy wool coat over work-worn clothes, and his boots were caked with mud and ice. He moved with a fluid grace that spoke of a life spent outdoors, and when he removed his hat, Helena noticed the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from squinting against bright mountain sun. "Mrs. Chen, I need supplies for another week at least. The pass is snowed and solid, and I cannot get the herd down until it clears." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel tumbling in a stream. "Mr. Hawthorne, always you wait until the last minute." Mrs. Chen shook her head but moved to gather his order. "You will freeze up there. The cattle need me more than I need comfort." He glanced at Helena then, really looked at her, and something flickered across his face. Concern, perhaps, or curiosity. "You are new to Cherry Creek." It was not a question, but Helena nodded anyway. "I arrived today. I was supposed to, but he—" The words would not come. The humiliation was too fresh, too raw. Mrs. Chen explained the situation in quick, efficient sentences while she filled a box with flour, coffee, beans, and dried meat. The man, Mr. Hawthorne, listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. "Thompson." He spat the name like a curse. "That snake. I heard he had run off, but I did not know he had left another victim behind." He studied Helena with those penetrating gray eyes. "What will you do?" "I do not know." The admission cost her what remained of her pride. "I have no money for lodging or passage elsewhere. I can work. I am educated. I can read and write and cipher. I can cook and sew and manage a household. I just need someone to give me a chance." "There is not much call for governesses in these mountains," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Most families do their own teaching, such as it is. The saloon always needs girls, but you do not want that kind of work." Helena's stomach turned at the suggestion, though she tried not to show it. She knew what work in a saloon meant for women, especially women without protection or other options. But what choice did she have? Starve. Freeze. Dawson Hawthorne set his jaw, a muscle ticking there. He was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he spoke, each word measured and deliberate. "I have a cabin up in the high country, 20 miles north of here in the valley below Mount Powell. I run cattle there, about 200 head. It is hard work and the loneliness can break a person. I have been looking for help, someone to manage the house and the cooking while I handle the stock. The pay would be room and board plus $20 a month. It is not Philadelphia, and it is not what you came here expecting, but it is honest work." Helena stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "You would hire me, just like that. You do not know anything about me. I know you traveled across the country alone to make a new life. That takes courage. I know Thompson cheated you, which means you are unlucky, not stupid. I know you are willing to work rather than beg." He shrugged. "That is enough for me, but I will be honest with you. The cabin is small. The winter is brutal. You will be miles from another woman, alone with a man you do not know. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. But I give you my word I will treat you with respect. You will have your own room, such as it is, and your privacy." Mrs. Chen nodded vigorously. "Mr. Hawthorne is a good man. Hard man, yes, but honest. He would not harm you." Helena's mind raced through her options. She could refuse and hope something else materialized, but what? There was nothing else. This rough stranger was offering her a lifeline, and she had no choice but to grab it with both hands. "I accept your offer, Mr. Hawthorne. Thank you. You will not regret this." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Call me Dawson. If we are going to live under the same roof, we might as well dispense with formalities. And I might regret it. You might too, but we will figure it out." He turned back to Mrs. Chen. "Add supplies for 2 to that order. She will need warmer clothes as well. Do you have anything that will fit her?" Over the next hour, Helena found herself outfitted with wool stockings, sturdy boots, a heavy coat lined with sheepskin, thick gloves, and a warm hat. Dawson paid for everything without comment, though she saw the stack of bills diminish considerably. She tried to thank him, but he waved her off. "You cannot work if you freeze to death. Consider it an investment." He loaded the supplies onto a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. "We need to leave now if we want to make it back before dark. It is a hard ride." Helena climbed onto the wagon seat, her new boots still stiff, her borrowed coat smelling of lanolin and sheep. Dawson settled beside her, taking up the reins with practiced ease. "Mrs. Chen waved from the doorway of her store, calling out something in her native language that sounded like a blessing. The wagon rolled forward, leaving Cherry Creek behind. The town was small, just a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the vastness of the mountains. As they climbed higher, following a rutted track that could barely be called a road, the settlement disappeared from view entirely. There was only snow and rock and the towering peaks that scraped the sky. Dawson drove in silence for a long time. Helena did not mind. She was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened, too busy trying to process the fact that this morning she had expected to be a merchant's wife. And now she was riding into the wilderness with a cattle rancher she had met less than 2 hours ago. Finally, as they crested a ridge and the valley below came into view, Dawson spoke. "I should tell you about myself. It is only fair since you are putting yourself in my hands." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I came out here 5 years ago from Kansas. I was tired of farming land that did not belong to me, tired of breaking my back to make other men rich. I had saved enough to buy a small herd and lease grazing rights on government land up here. It is beautiful country, but it is harsh. I have lost stock to cold, to predators, to falls. Some years I barely break even, but it is mine. The work is mine. The success or failure is mine. Do you understand? I think so. You wanted independence. I wanted to matter. On the farm in Kansas, I was just another pair of hands. Here, my choices make the difference between a good year and a bad one. Between life and death sometimes. He paused. I have been alone up here for too long. I thought I preferred it that way, but this winter has been harder than usual. I am not as young as I used to be, and the work. It takes a toll. How old are you? The question slipped out before Helena could stop it. 28. You? 22. He nodded as if this confirmed something. Young enough to adapt, old enough to know your own mind. That is good. The wagon descended into the valley and Helena gasped. Despite the snow and the bare trees, it was breathtaking. Mountains rose on all sides like the walls of a fortress, their peaks white against the brilliant blue sky. A frozen creek cut through the center of the valley, and scattered pines provided dark contrast to all that white. And there, nestled against the northern slope, was a cabin. It was small and rough, built from logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and a barn stood nearby, along with several corrals. A few cattle grazed on exposed patches of grass where Dawson must have cleared the snow. They looked up at the wagon's approach with mild curiosity before returning to their feed. Home, Dawson said simply. It is not much. It is wonderful, Helena replied, and meant it. After the crushing disappointment of the day, after believing herself completely ruined, this rough cabin in the wilderness looked like salvation. Dawson helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm and steady on her waist. She felt the strength in his grip, the calluses on his palms, and a strange flutter went through her stomach that she firmly ignored. He was her employer. She was his hired help. There could be nothing more between them. The inside of the cabin was dim and cold. Dawson quickly built up the fire in the large stone hearth while Helena looked around. There was one main room with a cooking area, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the fire. 2 doors led off the main room. Dawson pointed to one. That is my room. The other is yours. It is small, but there is a bed and a chest for your things. I built it last year thinking I might need storage, but you can use it. He hesitated. The cabin is not insulated like houses back east. It gets cold at night. If you need more blankets, tell me. Helena's room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and wooden chest, but it had a window that looked out over the valley, and someone, Dawson she assumed, had left a folded quilt on the bed. She set her carpetbag down and returned to the main room, already rolling up her sleeves. What needs doing? Dawson looked surprised. You just arrived. You must be exhausted. I am tired, but I will be more tired tomorrow and the day after that. Might as well start as I mean to continue. You mentioned you need to check on the cattle. Go, I will make supper. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. There is venison in the cold box outside, root vegetables in the cellar through that trapdoor, coffee and flour in the tins. I will be back before dark. He paused at the door. Helena, thank you. I know this is not what you wanted, but I am grateful you are here. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the cabin. She stood still for a moment, letting the reality of her situation sink in. Then she got to work. By the time Dawson returned, stamping snow from his boots, the cabin was warm and filled with the smell of stew. Helena had found everything she needed, including herbs dried from last summer that hung from the rafters. The table was set, and fresh coffee steamed in tin cups. Dawson stopped in the doorway, staring. You did all this? I told you I could cook. Sit. Eat. You look half frozen." They ate in companionable silence. The stew was good, the meat tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked. Dawson had 3 helpings, and Helena felt a quiet pride in her work. This she could do. This she understood. After supper, Dawson went to tend the horses while Helena washed the dishes in water heated on the stove. When he came back in, he found her sitting in the rocking chair, darning a hole in one of his shirts she had found in a basket. "You do not have to do that tonight. It needs doing. Besides, I am not tired yet. It helps me think." He poured himself more coffee and sat at the table watching her work. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the concentration in her dark eyes. She was pretty, he realized, not in a showy way but in a quiet, enduring way that snuck up on a man. Her hair, which had been pinned up under her hat, now fell in loose waves around her shoulders. She had capable hands, steady and sure. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Many things. How my life has changed in a single day, how strange it is to be here with you, how frightened I was this afternoon, and how much better I feel now, even though I am farther from civilization than I have ever been." "Are you still frightened?" "A little. But not of you." She tied off the thread and bit it with her teeth. "I am frightened of failing, of not being strong enough for this life, of winter and cold and loneliness. Those are reasonable fears. I have felt them all." He stood and added another log to the fire. "But you are stronger than you think. I can see it in you. You would not have come this far if you were not." "I hope you are right." That first night, Helena lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the logs creak and settle. She could hear Dawson moving in the next room, the rustle of blankets, the creak of his bed frame. She thought about how strange it was to be so close to a man she barely knew, separated by only a thin wall. But strangely, she did not feel unsafe. There was something solid about Dawson, something trustworthy. He was hard and rough like the mountains around them, but like the mountains, he seemed enduring and steady. She fell asleep thinking about the way he had looked at her across the fire, with something like respect in his eyes. The days that followed established a rhythm. Dawson rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses. Helena made breakfast, packed him food for the day, and spent her time cleaning, cooking, and organizing the cabin that had clearly lacked a woman's touch. She found tasks everywhere. Clothes that needed mending, shelves that needed building, windows that needed better coverings against the cold. In the evenings, they ate together and talked. At first, the conversations were stilted and awkward, 2 strangers trying to find common ground. But gradually, they began to share more. Dawson told her about growing up poor in Kansas, about his father who drank away what little money they had, about his mother who died when he was 15. He told her about the war, though he did not elaborate on what he had seen or done, just that he had served and survived and come home to find his father dead and the farm sold for debts. Helena told him about Philadelphia, about her parents who had been educated people fallen on hard times, about growing up in a house full of books and ideas, but very little food. She told him about their deaths, about her aunt who took her in but treated her as little better than a servant, about the desperate loneliness that had driven her to answer an advertisement from a man she had never met. "You regret it?" Dawson asked one night as they sat by the fire. "Coming west. I regret Thompson. I regret being fooled. But coming west, no. Even with everything that has happened, I do not regret that. There is something about these mountains. They are beautiful and terrible at the same time. They make me feel small, but also like I could be more than I was." "I know exactly what you mean. That is why I stayed. Back in Kansas, I was nobody. Here, I am nobody too, but at least I am nobody on my own terms." She laughed, a sound that surprised them both. It was the first time she had laughed since arriving in Colorado territory. That is a very odd philosophy, but true nonetheless. He smiled, and she realized it was the first time she had seen him really smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, bringing warmth to his gray eyes. Something shifted between them that night, some invisible barrier crumbling. They were no longer just employer and employee, no longer just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were becoming something else. Friends, perhaps, or the beginning of friends. Spring came slowly to the high country. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing brown grass that quickly turned green. The frozen creek broke with a thunderous crack and began to flow again. Wildflowers appeared seemingly overnight, splashing color across the valley. The cattle grew restless, eager for the higher pastures that were still blocked by snow. Helena spent more time outside as the weather warmed. She discovered a vegetable garden behind the cabin, overgrown and neglected, and set about clearing it. Dawson watched her work with an expression she could not quite read. "My wife planted that garden," he said one afternoon. Helena froze, her hands full of weeds. "Your wife, Mary. She died 3 years ago, giving birth to our son. He died too. They are buried on the hill overlooking the valley." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Helena could hear the pain beneath it, deep and old and never fully healed. "I am so sorry. I did not know. How could you? I do not talk about it." He crouched down beside her, running his fingers through the dark soil. "She loved this garden. She said it made her feel less alone. After she died, I could not bring myself to tend it. Every time I looked at it, I saw her there, humming while she worked. It hurt too much." Helena set down the weeds and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough, his knuckles scarred from hard work. "You still love her. I always will. But she is gone and I am still here. I am learning that I can love her memory and still keep living. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." She squeezed his hand gently. "Would it bother you if I replanted the garden? I can leave it if you prefer." "No. I think Mary would like knowing it was being used again. Plant whatever you want. I will help you when I can." That conversation marked another change. Dawson began to open up more, to share the deeper parts of himself. He told her about Mary, about how they had met in Kansas, about how she had followed him to Colorado territory, despite knowing how hard the life would be. He told her about the baby, a tiny boy who had never drawn breath, and how he had buried them both on a cold spring morning much like this one. Helena listened without judgment, offering comfort where she could, but mostly just being present. She understood that he needed to talk, that these memories had been locked inside him for too long. And in talking about Mary, he seemed to find some measure of peace. In turn, Helena found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. About the loneliness of her childhood, always being different, always being poor among people who valued wealth and status. About her fear that she was unlovable, that Thompson's betrayal confirmed something she had always suspected about herself. "That is foolishness," Dawson said firmly. "Thompson was a con man and a coward. His actions say nothing about you except that you were trusting. There is no shame in that. But maybe I should have known. Maybe I should have seen the signs." "How? You were in Philadelphia. He was here." "You could only go on his letters, and liars are good at writing convincing lies." He turned to face her fully, his expression intense. "Listen to me, Helena. You are brave and strong and capable. You have adapted to a life that would break most people from your background. You work hard without complaining. You have made this cabin feel like a home again. You are worth 10 of Thompson, and any man would be lucky to have you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are kind to say so." "I am not kind. I am honest. There is a difference." The weeks passed. each day bringing more warmth and light. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and Dawson was gone for days at a time, sleeping rough to watch over them. Helena found herself missing him when he was gone, listening for the sound of his horse, watching the trail for his return. When he came back, tired and dirty and needing a hot meal and a bath, her heart lifted in a way that had nothing to do with employer and employee. One evening in late May, after a supper of fresh trout Dawson had caught in the creek, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "There is a dance in Cherry Creek next Saturday, a spring celebration. Mrs. Chen mentioned it when I was in town for supplies. She thought you might like to go to see some other people, maybe meet some of the women from the surrounding ranches." Helena's first instinct was to refuse. She had grown comfortable in their isolated valley, in the simple rhythm of their days. The thought of going to town, of answering questions about her situation, made her anxious. But another part of her, the part that used to love parties and music and dancing, stirred with interest. "Would you go with me, if you want? I am not much of a dancer, but I can stand around and make conversation as well as the next man." He paused. "Unless you would rather go alone, I do not want to presume." "No, I would like it if you came. I would feel more comfortable with a familiar face." Something flickered in his eyes, pleasure perhaps. "Then we will go. It is about time I showed my face in town anyway. People will start to think I have turned into a hermit." The following Saturday dawned clear and warm. Helena spent the morning in an agony of indecision over what to wear. Her wardrobe was limited, most of her fine things having been lost or sold during her journey west. Finally, she chose a simple dress of dark blue calico that brought out her eyes. She pinned up her hair carefully, leaving a few tendrils loose to frame her face. When she emerged from her room, Dawson was waiting by the door in clean clothes, his hair slicked back with water, his beard neatly trimmed. He stared at her for a long moment. "You look beautiful." The words were simple, unadorned, but they hit Helena with unexpected force. No one had called her beautiful in years. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ride to Cherry Creek took 3 hours, the same trip that had taken 4 in the snow-choked depths of winter. They talked easily now, their conversation ranging from the mundane to the philosophical. Helena found herself laughing often, surprised by Dawson's dry sense of humor, by the intelligence that lurked beneath his rough exterior. Cherry Creek was transformed. Lanterns hung from every building. Music spilled from the town hall where a fiddle player and a guitarist were already warming up. People filled the streets, ranchers and miners and townspeople dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate the arrival of spring. Mrs. Chen spotted them immediately and hurried over, her face bright with pleasure. "Miss Helena, Mr. Hawthorne, I am so glad you came." "Helena, come, let me introduce you to some ladies. They have been asking about you." Dawson released her arm, giving her an encouraging nod. "Go, have fun, I will be around." Helena let herself be swept into a group of ranch wives and daughters, women with weathered faces and strong hands, women who had carved out lives in this hard country through sheer will and determination. They welcomed her warmly, asking questions about Philadelphia, about her journey, about how she liked working for Dawson. "He is a good man," one older woman said. "Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest. Everyone felt terrible about what happened to his wife. It is good he has help now. He was working himself to death up there alone." Another woman, younger and married to a miner, leaned in conspiratorially. "Is it true you two are not married? You just live there as his housekeeper?" Helena felt her cheeks burn. "Yes, it is a business arrangement, a business arrangement." The woman's tone suggested she did not believe it for a moment. "Well, business arrangement or not, the man cannot take his eyes off you. Look." Against her better judgment, Helena looked. Dawson was across the room talking to a group of ranchers, but even as he conversed, his gaze kept drifting to her. When their eyes met, he did not look away. Instead, he smiled, a slow, warm smile that made her heart stutter. "That is not how a man looks at his housekeeper," the woman said knowingly. The dance began, and Helena found herself swept onto the floor by various partners. She had learned to dance as a girl, and the steps came back to her, easily despite the informal frontier style. She danced with a banker, a rancher's son, a shy young miner who could barely string two words together. Between dances, she talked with the women, learning about their lives, their children, their hopes and fears. But always, always she was aware of Dawson, of where he was in the room, of who he was talking to, of the fact that he had not asked her to dance. Finally, as the evening was winding down, he approached her. The fiddle player had started a slow waltz, and couples were swaying together in the lamplight. "Dance with me," Dawson said. It was not quite a question, not quite a command. Helena placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, large and warm, and she rested her left hand on his shoulder. They were closer than they had ever been, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his pulse beat at his throat. "I thought you said you were not much of a dancer," she said as he guided her smoothly through the steps. "I said I was not much of a dancer. I did not say I could not dance at all." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Helena, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "These past months with you, they have been good, better than good. The cabin does not feel empty anymore. I do not feel empty anymore. When I am up in the high pastures, I find myself hurrying back, eager to see you, to hear about your day, to sit across from you at supper. And tonight, watching you laugh and dance with other men, I realized something." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "I realized I am in love with you." The world seemed to stop. The music faded. The other dancers disappeared. There was only Dawson, looking at her with such intensity, such vulnerability, such hope. "You love me," she repeated, needing to hear it again, needing to be sure. "I love you. I know it is too soon. I know you came here for a job, not a marriage proposal. I know you probably do not feel the same way, and that is fine. I can wait. I am a patient man, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "Dawson, you do not have to say anything. Just think about it. Think about whether you could ever see me as more than your employer, more than a friend, whether you could love me the way I love you." "I do not need to think about it," she said, her voice shaking. "I already know. I love you too. I think I have loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. I just did not let myself believe you could feel the same way." His expression transformed, wonder and joy and relief all mixing together. "You love me?" "Yes, you stubborn, wonderful man, I love you." He pulled her closer, propriety forgotten, and rested his forehead against hers. They swayed together, not really dancing anymore, just holding each other as the music played around them. "Marry me," he said. "Not as part of some arrangement, not out of convenience, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, right there on the dance floor with half of Cherry Creek watching. It was a gentle kiss, tender and full of promise. Helena felt it all the way to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body, chasing away the last lingering cold of winter. When they finally pulled apart, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and several of the ranch wives were dabbing at their eyes. "About time," one of the ranchers called out. "We were starting to think you were never going to get around to it, Hawthorne." Dawson laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and pulled Helena close to his side. I guess we are not as subtle as we thought. Not even a little bit, Mrs. Chen said, hurrying over to embrace them both. I knew from the first day, the way you looked at her, the way you protected her, love was inevitable. They stayed at the dance for another hour, accepting congratulations, making plans. Mrs. Chen offered to help Helena make a wedding dress. The local preacher, a circuit rider who passed through Cherry Creek once a month, agreed to perform the ceremony on his next visit in 3 weeks. The ride back to the valley was magical. The moon was full, painting the mountains in silver light. Dawson held the reins with one hand and kept the other around Helena's waist, keeping her close. They talked about the future, about children they hoped to have, about improvements to the cabin, about growing old together in their beautiful, isolated valley. "Are you sure about this?" Dawson asked as the cabin came into view. "Tying yourself to a rancher with more ambition than sense. Living in the middle of nowhere with only cattle and mountains for company." "I have never been more sure of anything," Helena replied. "This valley, this cabin, this life with you, it is everything I did not know I wanted. The mountains were so lonely and cold when I first saw them. But now, with you, they feel like home. You make them feel like home for me too," he said softly. "Before you came, this was just a place where I worked and slept. You turned it into something more, into a real home." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing for the wedding. Helena sewed her dress with Mrs. Chen's help, using fabric Dawson bought in town without being asked. It was simple but pretty, cream-colored cotton with tiny blue flowers embroidered around the collar and cuffs. Dawson cleaned and organized the cabin, built new shelves and a larger bed, even picked wildflowers and planted them in boxes outside the windows. They were married on a sunny morning in June, in the cabin's main room with the preacher officiating and Mrs. Chen and her husband serving as witnesses. Dawson had invited a few neighbors, ranchers from surrounding valleys who made the journey to celebrate with them. It was a small gathering, perhaps 15 people in all, but it felt perfect. Helena wore her new dress with flowers in her hair. Dawson wore his best clothes, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with emotion. When the preacher asked if he took Helena as his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong. When Helena said the same, her voice shook but did not waver. They exchanged simple gold bands that Dawson had ordered from Denver. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women present openly wept. The celebration afterward was joyful and rowdy. Mrs. Chen had brought food, as had the other neighbors. There was music and dancing and laughter. As evening approached and the guests began to leave, heading back to their own homes before dark, Helena and Dawson stood on the porch, waving goodbye. Finally, they were alone, husband and wife. Partners in every sense of the word. Dawson turned to her, suddenly shy. "I know this is not how you imagined your wedding night." "It is better," Helena said firmly. "It is real and honest and full of love. What more could I want?" He swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold like brides had been carried since time immemorial. Inside the cabin, he set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I love you, Helena Hawthorne. And I love you, Dawson Hawthorne, my husband." They made love that night with the tenderness of new lovers and the comfort of old friends. Helena had been nervous, her education about such matters limited to whispered rumors and vague warnings. But Dawson was patient and gentle, guiding her through each step, making sure she felt safe and cherished. The pleasure that built between them was a revelation, something sacred and profound. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the new bed, the window open to let in the cool night air and the sound of the creek burbling over stones. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am happy. That this morning I became your wife, and it feels like the most natural thing in the world. That I cannot imagine my life any other way now." "Good," he said, kissing the top of her head, "because you are stuck with me now, for better or worse, richer or poorer in these mountains forever. I cannot think of anywhere I would rather be." Summer in the high country was glorious. The days were warm and long, the sky impossibly blue. Helena tended her garden, which flourished under her care. She preserved food for the winter ahead, canning vegetables and fruits, drying meat, storing root vegetables in the cool cellar. Dawson worked with the cattle, moving them to follow the best grazing, keeping watch for predators and disease. They fell into an easy partnership, each supporting the other. When a late summer storm brought hail that threatened the garden, they worked together to cover the plants with blankets and boards. When Dawson injured his shoulder wrangling a stubborn steer, Helena nursed him back to health with poultices and patience. They worked hard, but they also found time for joy, for rides through the valley, pointing out birds and wildflowers, for picnics by the creek, for evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks, talking about everything and nothing. In August, Helena realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now there was no doubt. Her monthly courses had not come, and she felt a strange, fluttering sensation low in her belly. She was both thrilled and terrified, thinking of Dawson's first wife, of how Mary had died bringing his child into the world. She told him one evening after supper, unable to keep it to herself any longer. "Dawson, I have news." He looked up from the saddle he was mending, instantly alert to the tremor in her voice. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I hope nothing is wrong. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." The leather fell from his hands. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then suddenly he was across the room, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and a dozen other things I do not have words for. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cupping her face. "But I am also scared. Helena, I cannot lose you. I cannot go through that again. You will not lose me. I am strong and healthy. Many women bear children without trouble. Mary was strong and healthy too." His voice broke. "The baby came early. He was turned wrong. The midwife could not help. I watched her die, Helena. I held her hand while she bled, and there was nothing I could do." Helena's heart ached for him, for the trauma he had endured. "I know you are scared, but I am not Mary. This is not the same situation. We will be careful. When my time comes, we will go to Cherry Creek, stay with Mrs. Chen. The doctor there has delivered hundreds of babies. Promise me you will not take any risks. I promise. We will be safe, both of us." He kissed her then, desperate and clinging, and she held him tight, offering what comfort she could. That night he held her close, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, as if he could keep her safe through sheer force of will. The pregnancy progressed without trouble. Helena continued her work through the fall, though Dawson insisted she do less as her belly grew. He was overprotective to the point of absurdity, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a skillet. She found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when he tried to stop her from bringing in firewood. "Humor me. I need to feel like I am doing something useful." So she humored him, letting him fuss and worry, understanding that this was how he processed his fear. And beneath the fear, there was so much love. He talked to her belly, read to it from the few books they owned, sang old songs his mother had taught him. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters, carving little flowers into the headboard. In late October, as the first serious snows began to fall, they made the journey to Cherry Creek. Mrs. Chen welcomed them warmly, installing Helena in her spare room and treating her like precious cargo. Dawson stayed at the small boarding house but visited every day, pacing nervously, jumping at every sound. "You are going to wear a hole in my floor," Mrs. Chen scolded him. "Sit down. Drink tea. The baby will come when the baby is ready." The baby came on a cold November night, 2 weeks after they arrived in town. Helena's pain started at sunset and continued through the night. Dawson held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement even as his face went pale with fear. The doctor, a gruff man with gentle hands, oversaw everything with calm competence. Mrs. Chen assisted, having delivered babies in her home country before immigrating to America. The labor was long and difficult, but not dangerous. At dawn, with the first light breaking over the eastern peaks, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, perfect and healthy and absolutely beautiful. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the infant in Helena's arms. "Strong lungs on this one." Dawson stared at his son with wonder, tears streaming freely down his face. "He is perfect. Helena, you did it. You are both safe." "Meet your son," Helena said, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his child, Dawson said, "Daniel, after my mother's father, Daniel Hawthorne." "Daniel," Helena repeated, trying it out. The baby squinted up at her, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger. "Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world." They stayed in Cherry Creek for 2 weeks while Helena recovered her strength. Dawson barely left her side, marveling at the tiny person they had created. He learned to change diapers, to rock Daniel when he cried, to support Helena as she learned to nurse. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, his love for his son evident in every careful touch. When they finally returned to the valley, it was to a cabin transformed. Neighbors had come while they were gone, leaving gifts. Food, blankets, clothes for the baby, firewood stacked high against the coming winter. A note from Mrs. Chen was tacked to the door. "Welcome home, little family." That first winter with Daniel was both harder and more joyful than Helena had imagined. The baby woke frequently at night, crying to be fed or changed or simply held. Helena was often exhausted, her days and nights blurring together in a haze of feeding and rocking and trying to snatch moments of sleep. But Dawson helped with everything, walking the floor with Daniel when Helena needed rest, bringing her food and water, taking over the household chores without complaint. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he said one night, holding his sleeping son. "It terrifies me." "I know," Helena replied, "but that is what love is, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure." Spring returned as it always did. The snow melted, the creek thawed, and wildflowers bloomed across the valley. Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a fat, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. Helena returned to her garden, now with a basket where Daniel could sleep in the shade while she worked. Dawson returned to his cattle, though he stayed closer to home now, unwilling to be away for long stretches. One evening in May, almost a year after they married, they stood on the hill where Mary and her baby were buried. Dawson held Daniel, who was babbling happily and grabbing at his father's beard. "I wanted to come here with you," Dawson said, "to introduce Mary to Daniel, to tell her about you." Helena took his free hand, saying nothing, just being present. "Mary, this is my wife Helena and my son, Daniel. I want you to know I am happy. Helena made me whole again. She brought light back into my life. I will always love you and the baby we lost. But I am living now, not just surviving. I hope wherever you are at peace. I hope you understand." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh earth. A hawk cried overhead, circling in the clear blue sky. "She understands," Helena said softly. "She loved you. She would want you to be happy." "I am happy. Happier than I ever thought I would be again." He turned to her, Daniel still in his arms. "Thank you for that, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for saving me," she replied. "For seeing me when I was lost and offering me a home, for loving me when I did not think anyone ever would." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, their son between them, the mountains standing sentinel all around. The same mountains that had seemed so lonely and cold when Helena first arrived now felt warm and protective, sheltering their little family. Years passed, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and his mother in the garden. When he was 3, Helena gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who arrived early but healthy, filling the cabin with noise and laughter. 2 years later came another son, James, quiet and thoughtful even as an infant. The cabin itself grew to accommodate their expanding family. Dawson built an addition with help from neighbors, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He improved the barn, increased his herd, hired occasional help during busy seasons. The ranch became moderately prosperous, not wealthy but comfortable enough. Helena became known throughout the area as a healer. She had learned about herbs and remedies from books and experimentation, and people began to seek her help when they were sick or injured. She never charged for her services, but grateful families brought gifts: food, fabric, tools, labor. It created a web of community that enriched their lives beyond measure. The children thrived in the mountain valley. They learned to ride before they could properly walk, to read using the books Helena had managed to acquire over the years, to work hard and appreciate the beauty around them. Daniel showed a talent for working with animals like his father. The twins were inseparable, always creating elaborate games and adventures. James loved books and learning, spending hours listening to his mother's stories. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Dawson surprised Helena by taking her on a picnic to the meadow where wildflowers grew thickest. The children stayed with Mrs. Chen, who had become something of an honorary grandmother. 5 years, Dawson said, lying in the grass with Helena's head on his shoulder. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Do you remember the day we met, how miserable I was? I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. Coming all this way, staying composed even when your world had fallen apart. I remember thinking you were my last hope, that if you had not offered me that job, I do not know what I would have done. You would have survived. You always do." He turned to face her, propping himself up on one elbow. "But I am grateful every day that I was there that afternoon, that I walked into Mrs. Chen's store when I did, that I was brave enough to ask you to come home with me." "Best decision you ever made," Helena teased. "Best decision I ever made," he confirmed, completely serious. "You saved me, Helena. I was just existing before you, now I am living." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That is what love does." As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, they made their way back to the cabin. Their children would be home tomorrow, and the house would be chaotic and loud again. But for tonight, it was just the 2 of them, husband and wife, partners and lovers, 2 people who had found each other against all odds. The years continued to roll past, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. There were hard times, of course. The winter when Daniel was 10, A blizzard killed a dozen head of cattle and nearly destroyed the barn. The summer Emma broke her arm falling from a tree, and Helena had to set the bone herself because the doctor was 3 days' ride away. The year the garden failed due to late frost, and they had to be careful with their stores to make it through winter. But there were so many more good times. Daniel's pride when he successfully delivered his first calf. The twins learning to sew, making doll clothes that evolved into real garments. James teaching himself to play the harmonica by ear, filling the cabin with music. The family trips to Cherry Creek for the annual spring dance, which had become a beloved tradition. The quiet evenings by the fire, all of them together, talking and laughing and simply being. When Daniel turned 15, he began talking about going to Denver to learn about modern ranching techniques. Dawson encouraged him, despite Helena's worry. "He needs to see more than just these mountains," Dawson told her. "We cannot keep him here forever, and we should not want to. He will come back. This valley is in his blood." "You sound very sure." "I am sure. Because it is in my blood too, and I always came back. This is home. He will understand that just like we did." Daniel did go to Denver, and he did come back, bringing with him new ideas and a mail-order bride of his own, a sweet girl from Ohio named Catherine. The pattern repeating, but in a better way. The ranch continued to grow under Daniel's energy and Dawson's experience. The twins married local boys, ranchers' sons from neighboring valleys. They stayed close, their cabins within riding distance, so Helena saw her daughters and eventually her grandchildren regularly. James went east for college, something no one from their area had done before, but he returned after 3 years, homesick for the mountains and his family. Dawson and Helena grew old together, their faces weathering like the rocks around them, their bodies wearing down from years of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more essential. They moved more slowly but still worked every day, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like newlyweds. One crisp autumn evening when they were both in their 60s, they sat watching the sunset over the mountains they had called home for over 40 years. The valley was quieter now, most of the children and grandchildren in their own homes, though they visited often. "Do you remember what you said our wedding night?" Dawson asked. "About the mountains feeling like home." "I remember." "Do they still feel that way?" Helena squeezed his hand, looking out at the peaks painted gold by the dying light. "More than ever. But it is not really the mountains that make it home. It is you. Wherever you are, that is home for me." "Same for me," he said quietly. "You turned my life from black and white into color. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every morning." "We gave each other those things," Helena corrected, as she always did. "That is how partnership works." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them through decades of love and work and life. The same mountain stood sentinel, eternal and unchanging, while everything within their embrace grew and evolved and eventually passed away. But the love Dawson and Helena built in that valley, in that small cabin that grew into a home, that love persisted. It persisted in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their name, in the stories told around fires about the mail-order bride who came west to marry a con man and ended up finding true love with a lonely cowboy instead. The mountains had been lonely and cold once, ancient and indifferent to human concerns. But Dawson and Helena had made them witness to something beautiful. They had taken their isolation and transformed it into sanctuary, their loneliness into love. Their cold stone hearts had warmed to embrace this family, this home, this enduring legacy. And so the years passed, one into another, seasons cycling in eternal rhythm. Dawson and Helena remained in their valley, held by the mountains they loved, sustained by the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work, and love that refused to die. As they grew older, their children encouraged them to slow down, to let the younger generation take over the hardest work. Daniel now ran the ranch with his sons. The twins and their families helped with harvests and brandings. James, who had become a teacher, spent summers at the valley, his children running wild the same way he once had. But Dawson and Helena refused to be idle. They still tended the garden together, though Helena sometimes needed help standing after weeding. Dawson still rode out to check on the cattle, though he stayed closer to the cabin now and sometimes took a grandchild along. They had earned their rest, but could not quite bring themselves to take it. Work had been the backbone of their life together for so long that stopping felt wrong. One spring morning, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air smelled of pine and new growth, Helena woke to find Dawson already up and dressed, standing at the window looking out at the valley. "Could not sleep?" she asked, joining him. "I slept fine. I just wanted to watch the sunrise." He put his arm around her and she leaned into his familiar warmth. "I was thinking about the first spring you were here, how you brought this place to life, how you brought me to life. We were so young then, so scared and uncertain, but brave. We were brave." He kissed the top of her head, white now instead of dark brown. "I want you to know something. These 40-plus years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. I have no regrets. None." "Neither do I," Helena said firmly. "Even the hard parts, even the painful parts, I would not trade any of it. This life with you has been everything." They stood together watching the mountains emerge from shadow as the sun rose behind them. The valley sparkled with dew. Birds sang their morning songs. The creek burbled its eternal melody. Everything was as it had always been, and yet completely different because they were there to witness it, to love it, to call it home. That afternoon, Daniel and his family came for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had persisted for decades. The cabin was full of noise and laughter, grandchildren running in and out, the table laden with food. Dawson sat at the head of the table with Helena beside him, and he looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, each one a miracle, each one proof that life could be good and generous even when it started hard. After the meal, the youngest grandchildren begged for a story. This was another tradition. Dawson or Helena would tell tales of the old days, of building the ranch, of harsh winters and narrow escapes, of the time a bear got into the chicken coop, or the time the creek flooded and nearly washed away the garden. "Tell us how you met," one of the girls pleaded. "That is my favorite." So Helena told the story one more time, with Dawson adding details and corrections, the tale polished smooth from many retellings. She told them about traveling west to marry a man who turned out to be a liar, about being stranded and penniless in a strange town, about a kind stranger who offered her a chance when she had none. "And grandfather fell in love with you right away?" the girl asked. "Not right away," Dawson said, catching Helena's eye, "but pretty quickly. How could I not? She was brave and strong and made the best stew I had ever tasted." "And you fell in love with him?" another grandchild asked Helena. "I did. He was kind and honest and made me feel safe. And he showed me that these mountains, which seemed so harsh at first, were actually beautiful. He taught me to see the grace in hard things." The children accepted this explanation, satisfied. They did not yet understand the complexity of adult love, how it could be both simple and infinitely complicated, how it required work and sacrifice and choosing each other every single day. They would learn those lessons in time, when they had their own loves and lives to navigate. As evening approached and the family prepared to leave, Daniel pulled his parents aside. We want you to know when you are ready to fully retire, the cabin and the land are yours for as long as you want them. We will build our own place nearby. This is your home. You built it and it should be yours." Dawson's eyes grew wet. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." After everyone left, Helena and Dawson sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, a blanket across their laps despite the mild weather. They were tired in a bone-deep way that came from age and a lifetime of labor, but they were content. "You think we did right by them?" Helena asked. "The children, do you think we prepared them for life? Look at them. They are strong, capable, kind. They work hard and love deeply. What more could we have done?" Dawson reached over and took her hand. "We did our best, and our best was good enough. They will have their own struggles, make their own mistakes, but they have a foundation. We gave them that." "Yes," Helena agreed. "We did." The summer passed in a golden haze. Dawson and Helena settled into an even gentler rhythm, spending their days puttering in the garden, sitting in the sun, receiving visits from children and grandchildren. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversations of people who had said it all before but never tired of hearing each other's voices. In August, Dawson had a coughing fit that worried Helena. She made him see the doctor in Cherry Creek, who listened to his chest and shook his head. "Your lungs are not good. Too many years of cold mountain air and hard work. You need to rest more, Mr. Hawthorne. Take it easy." But Dawson had never known how to take it easy. He continued his routines, though Helena watched him with increasing worry. The cough persisted through autumn, getting worse as the weather turned cold. By the time the first snow fell, he was spending more time in bed than up, his breathing labored, his face pale. Daniel wanted to take him to Denver to see specialists, but Dawson refused. "I am not leaving this valley. I was born elsewhere, but this is where I lived. This is where I will die." "Do not talk like that," Helena said, though she knew he was right. She had seen enough death in her years as a healer to recognize when it was approaching. "You are going to be fine." "I am not going to be fine, my love. And that is all right. I have had more than I ever deserved, more years than I had any right to expect. I am not afraid." But Helena was afraid. After more than 4 decades together, the thought of existing without him was incomprehensible. They had been partners for so long that she did not know how to be just herself anymore. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold. Dawson weakened rapidly. The family gathered, sensing the end was near. Daniel and his wife stayed at the cabin. The twins came with their families. James took leave from his teaching position. They took turns sitting with their father, holding his hand, sharing memories, telling him they loved him. On a clear, cold night just before Christmas, with the sky brilliant with stars, Dawson slipped away. Helena was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it countless times before. His last words were for her. "Thank you for everything. Wait for me." "I will," she promised. "I will wait for you." Then he was gone, his chest stilling, his hand going slack in hers. Helena sat with him for a long time, saying her private goodbyes, memorizing his face one last time. The children wept, but she remained dry-eyed. The grief was too large for tears. It filled her completely, leaving no room for anything else. They buried him on the hill next to Mary and her baby, in a spot where he could look down over the valley he had loved. The whole community came for the funeral. People from every corner of the high country, all of them with stories about how Dawson had helped them once, had been kind when he did not need to be, had been a good man in a hard world. After the funeral, Daniel tried to convince Helena to come stay with him and his family. "You should not be alone, Mother." "I am not alone. I am here with him, with our memories, with the life we built. I know you worry, but this is where I need to be." He did not press, understanding that some things could not be argued with. but he and his siblings took turns visiting, making sure she had everything she needed, worried about the old woman living alone in the mountain cabin. But Helena was not lonely. Dawson's presence filled the cabin still. She felt him in every corner, heard his voice in the wind, saw his face in the flames of the fire. She talked to him as she had when he was alive, sharing her day, asking his opinion, laughing at things he would have found funny. She continued her routines because they were what she knew. She tended the garden in spring and summer. She preserved food for winter. She healed those who came to her door seeking help. She welcomed her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren as they appeared. 2 years passed this way. Helena grew more frail, but her mind remained sharp. She knew she was winding down, her body preparing to stop. She was ready. She had done everything she wanted to do, seen her children grown and thriving, held her grandchildren, left her mark on the world in ways large and small. On a spring morning much like the one when she had first arrived in Colorado territory all those years ago, Helena woke with a strange sense of peace. She dressed carefully in her favorite dress, fixed her hair, and walked out onto the porch. The valley was glorious, green and gold in the morning light. The mountains stood eternal, witness to all the joy and sorrow they had held. "I am coming," she said to the air, to Dawson, to the universe. "Wait for me." Daniel found her that afternoon, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, her face peaceful, a slight smile on her lips. She had simply stopped, worn out from a life fully lived, ready to join the man she had loved for almost half a century. They buried her next to Dawson on the hill, the whole community gathering once more to mourn and celebrate. Her children spoke of her strength, her kindness, her wisdom. Her grandchildren told stories of her healing skills and her laugh. Everyone agreed she had been extraordinary, a woman who had transformed a harsh wilderness into a home, who had turned loneliness into love. The ranch passed to Daniel and his sons, who continued the work Dawson and Helena had started. The cabin remained, maintained carefully as a tribute to its builders. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing stories of the mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy who found each other in the mountains and created something beautiful from nothing but determination and love. The valley itself seemed to remember them. On quiet evenings, people claimed they could hear laughter from the old cabin, see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the meadow. The garden Helena planted continued to bloom every spring, wildflowers mixing with vegetables in glorious profusion. The mountains stood as they always had, but those who knew the story swore they seemed warmer somehow, less austere, as if love had indeed changed even stone and ice. Time moved on as it always does. The Wild West faded into memory and myth. The rough frontier towns became cities. The dangerous trails became highways. But in that high valley below Mount Powell, in the shadow of the mountains, the story of Dawson and Helena persisted. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, written in family Bibles, passed down through generations. Because some love stories are too powerful to fade, some lives are too well lived to forget. The mountains had been lonely and cold once, ancient and indifferent. But a cowboy and his bride had made them feel like home, had transformed them through love and work and sheer stubborn persistence. And in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love that would warm that valley long after the last person who knew them personally had passed away. Their great-great-grandchildren still run cattle in that valley, still tend gardens in the shadow of the cabin, still feel the presence of those who came before. They understand, in a way that does not need words, that they are part of something larger than themselves. part of a story that began with a desperate woman and a lonely man who took a chance on each other and built something extraordinary. The mountains still stand, eternal and unchanged, but they are not lonely anymore. They are not cold. They are home, warm with the memory of love, blessed by the family that grew from two people who refused to let circumstance defeat them. And on clear spring mornings, if you listen carefully, you can still hear Helena's laugh mixing with Dawson's deep voice. Two souls who found each other across the vastness of the frontier and held on tight, never letting go. Not even death capable of separating what they had forged together in that harsh and beautiful place.